It's the Uprising.
Welcome back to the Uprising. I have Michael Ruiz on the show today. He is a candidate for the 2022 cycle. He is running in Massachusetts District 8. I get those M's mixed up. So yeah, I definitely wanted to have him on the show. This Uprising, we're going to be starting getting candidates on the show for the coming cycle. So definitely want to have him on the show. He's a great candidate, and has a great story to tell. So I will let you have it, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for listening to my podcast and for bringing me on the show today. So my name is Michael, and I live in Boston. I've lived in the greater Boston area for about 5 or 6 years now, and I decided to run for Congress kind of non-traditionally. Growing up, I wasn't very politically active. I grew up in a really poor neighborhood in Los Angeles, California, and we had a lot of socioeconomic poverty. There was a lot of things going on in my neighborhood that were not the best.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the first instances of me being exposed to politics was when I was growing up in public housing, right? And the Caltrans, California Department of Transportation, really had been lobbying for years to put a freeway through our neighborhood in order to connect a southern city with a northern city, and they were willing to displace all of the families in between to make this a possibility to ease traffic in that area. So that was the first time that I was exposed to the power of organizing and bringing people together. And 20 years later, they still have not built that freeway through that community. My mom still lives in that house that we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought anything more of that. I just thought this is what people do. So I've sort of stayed in that framework. I've stayed in that mind frame of, if there's something not right in a community, then we as people need to stand up and put pressure on our elected officials to make change and to represent us. And that's why I decided that I was going to run for Congress. I did this not lightly. It took a lot of effort and a lot of thinking about how I would do this, because it is not an easy path to Congress at all. I'm not wealthy or well-funded or connected politically at all. Mm-hmm. I think about things like everyday people think about things. I'm worried about getting to work every day. One of my primary issues in my platform is transportation. The greater Boston area has some of the worst traffic congestion and the worst transportation infrastructure in this nation, and there's absolutely no political will to do anything about it. The other thing is we have a massive opioid epidemic right outside my door. I live in an area that's known as methadone Mile. So we're seeing the real effects of the aftermath of the opioid crisis in real time on the ground. And I know because I see it. And lastly, I'm really focused on strengthening the worker power in the economy, because we've seen year after year the decimation of unions. We've seen the gig economy rise up, which strips workers away from basic protections like negotiating your salary. I know because I've been a contractor and I've been a full-time employee, and I far prefer being a full-time employee with the ability to negotiate a salary.
Yeah, and with Prop 22, I do worry that that's going to be going around the country with Uber and Lyft. If you're not aware, California passed a bill to say that Uber and their drivers are not employees; they're contractors. So a great way to screw over Uber employees and Lyft employees. And I worry that that's going to go around the country. They're already starting to try to do that in New York, and I'll assume they're going to try to do that in the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And it's terrible because with this crisis, they are all these jobs are going away, and I feel like it's like going to be like 5 companies that you're able to work for. It's like Amazon and Uber and some other ones. And I feel like our politicians are not doing anything about it either. They're just playing partisan politics and not ever wanting to do anything for the people. So I appreciate that you're wanting to change things up and run for office, because, like you said, it is not easy, and especially if you don't have wealthy family, wealthy friends, well-connected person yourself. If you're not those things, it's way harder to run for office than if you have those connections. So again, I really appreciate people like you and yourself for running for office, because that's not easy. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so we had a progressive running for office this last cycle. He didn't win, but he did a great job. I thought he had the most votes ever from any person running for office. He was the first, I believe, first African American man to actually be the nominee for the Democratic Party in Tulsa, the first district of Oklahoma, and he was the first person from Ghana. Ghana, yeah, Ghana. He first Ghana person has that heritage to be a nominee for Congress at all. So
That's amazing. That's awesome. I love hearing stories like that. I've actually talked to a few other congressional candidates, past and present, on my own podcast.
mhm.
Um, and it's really amazing where people come from, especially just everyday people. Um, I've, I love talking to other people about why they decided to run.
Yeah, and like a lot of people have different reasons and different avenues to run. And
Mhm.
again, you seem like a great candidate. So I do kind of want to talk about your platform a tad. So do you consider yourself a progressive?
I do, and I didn't really when I first started. Um,
Yeah,
I thought that I was just kind of. I thought that these things made common sense to everybody, that people
yeah,
should be able to get to work and they deserve the right to work and have access to a job, and you live your life basically. But
yeah,
apparently, these are very controversial statements.
yeah,
Um, but I do consider myself a progressive in it because I'm more closely aligned with the progressive movement and sort of the left that exists today.
yeah,
Not in the halls of the elite Congress, and
mhm,
that's a whole other issue. But
yeah,
I do see myself as a working class person who espouses leftist politics.
yeah. So do you support Medicare for all, or do you support a kind of a public option?
I support Medicare for all. I don't support a public option, and there's a couple of reasons why I don't find the public option to be an economically viable way to go about ensuring everyone has healthcare. First of all, if you have the two systems in place, if you have the public option and you still have private insurance existing, they're gonna what you're going to see when you start implementing that program without proper controls is you're going to see a massive influx of people buying into the public option and overwhelming the healthcare system right away. So it's going to be bad healthcare right off the bat.
Mhm.
It's going to be hard to get basic healthcare. The government is not going to be able to um, administer that program just right off the bat without proper controls and coming up with ways of administering that program, because it's going to have its hyper competitive, hyper predatory counterpart, the predatory private insurance industry, lowering its prices or increasing its prices or offering higher quality healthcare. And so I think that if you just have a public option in a private sector, then the public option will inevitably fail.
Yeah,
So I'm supportive of a universal healthcare system.
and the usual thing after that is how you're going to pay for it, and how is that a misnomer and kind of a nonsense talking point?
I'm so glad you asked that. So for for two reasons, that's a non-compelling argument for me, because the question of how we pay for it has been asked and answered over 100 times. When that challenge is sort of levied at me, I number one throw at kind of answer the question with a question, which is, Well, how do we pay for endless war? How do we write blank checks for the military industrial complex? Why don't we do the same thing for our healthcare? And the second thing is that gets kind of thrown at me, which is sort of straw man, right? Which is, well, you have to balance a budget. You can't do you have to spend within your means. The federal government is a currency issuer, not it's also a currency user, but it's a currency issuer. So what that means is that it can run a deficit, and it would not it there are economic indicators that would suggest that inflation occurs, which is the thing that conservatives are very, very concerned about and engage in austerity politics with. But that's not a valid argument to not provide health care for every individual person in the United States. And then the third thing that I would add to that is um, we we spend more per capita on healthcare than any other developed nation, and that's because we don't negotiate prices with drug companies. We have because our government doesn't allow us to. Why wouldn't the richest, wealthiest country, the most powerful country on the planet Earth, not negotiate prices? We have huge negotiating power. Why wouldn't we do that?
It's a corruption, really.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
unfortunately, a lot of politicians are bought by a big pharma. So,
Mhm.
and the hospitals don't want to, they like to charge as much as ridiculous possible, like with prices. You can go to one hospital, get a kidney surgery, and it's one price, and you go down the street and it's another price.
And that's you bring up a great point there too, because when I talk to people about this issue and I talk to them about Medicare for all, the thing that they are concerned about is the decreased quality in healthcare, but also their people don't like surprise billing. And I was just going through this the other day. I'm going in for like a routine procedure, and I have to double check whether or not I need a referral to do this. Like when I hear people talk about how they don't want to lose their private insurance, I really try to push them on that and ask them why. What is it about it that you like? Because I also have private insurance. I'm forced to live in the system just like you, and I find it really tedious. I hate getting a surprise medical bill. I hate having to call and fight with insurance companies to make sure that something's covered or not. And then they ultimately have the authority to decide whether something or not is covered. I have no power here.
You have no power, and you're kind of in the cold because those decisions are made for you in ways.
Mhm.
And sometimes I don't even understand what the purpose of even insurance is if you're having to pay out of pocket prices and co-pays and everything else. And half the time, the insurance company doesn't even want to even cover at all. They're going to try to use every loophole imaginable. So they're kind of like the middleman that won't go away. And we're really behind as a country when it comes to healthcare. We're the richest country in the world, but we probably have one of the worst ones healthcare as a developed country. And I mean, UK has full-on government healthcare, which I actually don't support. I think we should do more like Canada or what Bernie Sanders wants to do, which I think that's a gold standard in my eyes. So yeah, that's great. You support Medicare for all. So, other thing I definitely want to get you on this one is so this is a big topic right now in the left in the Democratic Party. The president just made comments about it. I want to say this week, and he is really critical of defund the police and the slogan. And I think honestly, I think he doesn't want to even do it. I think he's using the slogan as an excuse. But so, how do you feel about defund the police? How do you feel about that policy? Do you think that's a right framework, like the framing of it, defund the police, or do you think we should use a different word or whatever else that would appease corporate Democrats?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple of things with that. So first, I would start by saying that I think defund the police was largely misunderstood because of right-wing propaganda campaigns against it.
Hmm.
I think it was misunderstood because what they were saying was that there are police budgets that are overinflated, and they are using this to purchase like, military weapons over police communities. And we should really be taking a look at defunding those excess efforts of state control that are harmful to communities rather than helpful. But that doesn't fit nicely on the tagline.
Yeah.
So they framed it as defund the police. And there's a couple of reasons why I agree and disagree. I'm of two minds of this because I do think that there are good police. I've met them, I know them, but we know that there are bad apples out there. We know that there's bad character out there. We witnessed this with the George Floyd incident, with Breonna Taylor. We saw this. You can't dispute these facts when you see them live streaming on Facebook and Instagram.
Hmm.
What I think is one option is to increase funding for police training. And I don't want to I want to be clear. I don't There are different the municipal governments handle what police training looks like. So for example, in Boston, police get certain time for training, for physical training, for physical fitness training, for how to use their weapon, a variety of training. So if I were in charge of a police budget, I would want to maybe increase their ability to train in the martial arts. I would say, hey, this is a type of training that builds character, that builds strong character traits that I like to see in police members. It builds empathy, it builds sympathy, it builds self confidence. 9 out of 10 times, what we see with these incidents of police killing unarmed Black men is they say that they were afraid for their life. Well, how are you afraid of somebody that doesn't have a gun pointed at you? I myself have de escalated a person with a gun, and I am not a cop.
Yeah.
So I know it's possible. This man was mugging me in the middle of the street when I was living in Baltimore, Maryland, and I was able to de escalate him. So I
Yeah.
don't know how a cop cannot do it. So that's one thing that I would do if this were on my plate. But with President Barack Obama coming out and saying that this was harmful to Democrats, I think he's flat wrong. I think that he's misunderstanding what what that actually means and what communities are facing today.
Yeah. We definitely respond to that. So I agree somewhat with you. With the President Obama, I think he thinks some people aren't educated on the topic, and like you said, they're going with Republican propaganda, with acting like that means they want to abolish the police, which some people do, but that's not the overwhelming uh, idea of what people want to do. That they want to move funding to other resources. Do you think that poverty leads to crime? Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
absolutely. It breeds crime inherently because you are in such an economically desperate situation. What other choice do you have? Some I'm gonna get a little old school here, but my favorite rapper is Tupac,
yeah.
and he wrote a song called "Changes."
Mm-hmm.
And every time I listen to that song, I think about how it was written over 20 years ago, and I'm like, we're still going through the same thing. This guy is a prophet.
Yeah.
He saw this happening on the streets in LA, and we see it happening everywhere throughout this country.
Yeah.
That song is as true today as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. It not much changed, man, and you can argue even it's gotten worse since that.
Mhm.
I was made in like the early '90s. I was a kid then, but I still know the song, and I'm a big fan. He's right. Like you're right. He talked about how things haven't changed and they need to change, and that's good on that front. I think. Why do you think that people are so afraid of that word? And when it comes to policing, and like it's like kind of like the right's kind of using it as like a boogeyman to a degree. And why do you think that's kind of resonating with certain people?
Yeah, so I think that term defund sounds like abolish,
Hmm.
and I think that That's the inevitable conclusion that one would draw from just hearing that slogan and watching Fox News.
Yeah.
What So let's talk about that though, because when you think about abolishing police, people get really scared about what that means. And there are people out there who do want to abolish the police, but you could institute those reforms, those practices towards going down the road of abolition, and it wouldn't solve the problem of the police. Because those types of reforms of like cut out police budgets, cut out, uh, abolish the police and just get rid of them, that is not going to solve the problem of targeted state violence. A new police force would come up. Something would have to come in to protect citizens from each other.
Yeah.
And to protect private property owners, because that's really what the police was created for in the first place. There was an armed class of citizens that were enshrined with state power to protect the ruling class. So all of the efforts to reform the police are, I think, in my opinion, would fail because it comes from an incorrect understanding of why the police exist to begin with.
Protect property, is that kind of what the one of the reasons why you feel like they were instituted initially?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Just from if you read history books, if you read a people's history, if you read into sort of the anthropology and archaeology of society and the first states, there needed to be a class of people to protect the ruling class. And
Mhm.
that's where the idea of the police comes from.
Yeah. And then it kind of morphed into bringing slaves back, and now what it is now. And speaking of that, do you support reparations, and or do you not support that?
I I do, but so the problem I think with that is how it's framed. And so, as we talk about reparations, people talk about monetary reparations, and I think that that's a good start. But what inevitably happens in these discussions is it starts to become means tested. And they start to question, well, if you're a wealthy Black person, why do you need any reparations?
Mm.
So they don't really pay attention to these talks around reparations. I don't think really address the social and economic impacts that the vestiges of slavery have on people. And until you correctly understand how those impact the ongoing daily lives of the working class and the working poor Black of this country, you're not going to be able to repair the social and economic antagonisms that they face every day.
Mhm. You we got to change how people think and what's in their hearts in a way.
Mhm.
For until those things happen, this country is not going to change in the degree that it needs to. And I think reparations will help heal some of the wounds that's caused, but that's not going to solve everything. We have a white supremacist problem in this country, I think, and until we tackle that problem, these problems that when it comes to African American community, it's going to continue in my eyes.
I absolutely agree with you, and that's why I support a number of the universal programs that have been proposed by the social democrats and by the Bernie left, of which I'm a part of. Uh, Medicare for all,
Mm,
college for all, things
yeah.
that disproportionately impact working Black and Brown communities because they take on higher levels of debt in just those areas of our economy alone.
Mhm. And you do support you do support college for all as well. Free college.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And cancellation of student loan debt. But I will admit my bias there because I do have student loan debt.
Yeah, a lot of people do, and so yeah, that I actually think that I want to segue actually to the administration of Biden's administration, and do you think cancellation of student debt will happen under a Biden administration?
I am hopeful that it will happen. I'm hopeful that this would be seen as more than just economic stimulus, that it would be seen as it really is, which is economic stimulus. And I'm hopeful that it will happen. I don't know that it will because of his sort of history on being a deficit hawk
Hmm.
and is talking about not necessarily, he's talked previously in the press about kind of like the pantry's going to be bare when I'm elected into office, and we're going to have to see about that. We're going to have to figure it out,
Yeah,
and see what we can work with, which again doesn't understand how currency works in this country.
yeah, and that framing and those words are going to be coming from the Republican side.
Mhm.
They're going to go back to being deficit hawks, even though they don't care about deficit when they're in charge, but they definitely do when Democrats in charge. Do you expect Republicans? They're already kind of signaling that they're going to go back to that 2010 strategy.
I I could see that. Do you mean like the Freedom Party, kind of the
Yeah,
Tea Party
yeah,
caucus?
the Tea Party kind of the deficit, whining about the deficit and government overreach and everything they tried to do in the 2010 Obama administration.
I could see them continuing that.
Yeah,
What I would like to see is some of those tactics employed on the left, particularly among the progressive social democrats, like the Squad, really holding the line and holding the feet to the fire of the establishment Democratic elites, and really employing some of those same tactics.
yeah. Because Republicans, I don't like their ideas, but I do respect them when it comes to how good they're at politics. They are really good,
I
I think.
agree. And I think, you're so right, because when I talk to Republicans or conservative leaning people, they're not wrong to be mad at some of the things that they're mad at. There's a lot of anger and frustration with some of these moral virtue signaling that happens from the social justice warriors on the left, that are really extreme cases of leftist activists that claim to speak for everybody on the left, but they most certainly do not. But where I think they go wrong is drawing the wrong conclusions, and moving over to the right, further to the right than I think that they would normally be on if they hadn't been shamed, if they hadn't been called racist, sexist, xenophobic, transphobic, all of the horrible things that you can call somebody.
Mm,
So I think when we do that, we start ceding ground to the right and losing our own ground, as as just moral humans, just
yeah.
trying to, extend an olive branch and understand somebody.
Yeah, I agree to a certain degree. I mean, some people you're not going to reach. You're not going to
Oh yeah,
convince the white supremacists to do certain things you would want to do, or things like that, or a white supremacist terrorist. You're not going to convince those people either. But definitely gettables on the Republican side, and I think a helping hand to other citizens of this country definitely would be advised. And I kind of disagree a little bit too, as well. I mean, you kind of made a bet with if you still supported the president in this cycle. You kind of at least not be a racist or all those other things you just said, but you're at least to a certain degree okay with those things, because even full on Republicans that voted Republican their entire life, they stopped voting for him because of those things. So, certain degrees, I do agree with you, but certain degrees that you kind of made your bed, so you kind of have to lay in it. And there's so many other people that don't vote, and I think the Democrats definitely need to focus on those people as well.
I agree, and I would just add to that, the Democrats have been claiming to be the party of the working class since I was a little boy. I
Mhm.
grew up in a family, we're Mexican, we're Latinos, we're proud, and we've always been working class and hard workers. And so we've always just been default Democrat. It hasn't been until I got a fuller understanding of my economic and social conditions on the ground that I really started to be critical of the Democratic Party and noticed the shift towards Silicon Valley, noticed the shift toward big tech and big pharma. And Democrats have steadily become more the party of elites, and Republicans have taken the working class, have taken up the non voters. And I think that that's a huge problem and a huge failure of the Democratic Party as it exists today. They
Yeah.
really need to start reaching other constituents and reaffirming that they are, in fact, the party of the working class, if that is what they are.
Hmm.
My critique against the Democratic Party is, I mean, that's a whole other show,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
is mainly that they are liberals cosplaying as leftists to try to virtue signal a moral position rather than produce any substantive policy that would actually help working people.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the Republicans cosplaying as Democrats in my eyes. I mean, and if I'm not even being kind of ridiculous in my eyes, I think if we Ronald Reagan ran for president in 2024, he'd probably call it socialist. So I don't think a lot of Americans understand how right wing a country we live in. I mean,
Yes.
Bernie Sanders is a moderate rest of the world, and he's a far left communist in this country. Some weird reason people think that, which that's on the media and that's on politicians, and they're not defined what our actual left and right in this country is. So before I get you out of here, we're about at the 30-minute mark. I want to ask you, what do you think some of the good things the Biden administration will fight for, and what we as progressives can hope for? And if you just want to get anything else out before we get out of here.
Yeah, so I think he's going to fight for, I think he's getting stronger on climate change. I think he's moving towards a little bit more towards what some of the provisions of the Green New Deal have proposed. And I want to be clear, the Green New Deal is a resolution, not a law,
Hmm.
as some have argued in the media. But I also think that he's going to fight for economic stimulus, which is something that I think everybody needs. I don't know that it's going to go as strong as some economists say that it needs to go with regards to spending and getting money in the hands of people. I don't know that it's going to go as far as I think it should.
Hmm.
I think we might see some student loan debt cancellation. There is a precedent that has been established when the Trump administration forgave the VA when the Trump administration forgave permanently disabled veterans student loans.
Hmm.
So there is a precedent there for him to do that through executive order in the sort of the lame duck Congress that we're going to see for the 118th or the 117th Congress rather.
Yeah.
So I think that there are things that we may see him do good on. For example, I'm hoping he's going to fund infrastructure. That's one of my big issues, transportation infrastructure. I was on a train and a bus that caught fire.
Mm.
That's happened to me more than once on the Boston MBTA. So I hope that he sends us money to help us fix our transportation networks
Mm.
because my opponent has been on the House Transportation Committee for years, and yet we have the worst transportation infrastructure in the country.
Yeah.
So there's a few things that I am hopeful for. Obviously, I'm happy that Donald Trump will no longer be in office.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're moving away from that.
Mhm.
But he's just a symptom. He's
Yeah.
not the cause.
Yeah.
Um,
He's he kind of shone a light on all the worst things of America: the arrogance, the ignorance, the racism, the sexism, the xenophobia, the greed, and everything else that unfortunately are about to be, hopefully, unless they do some shenanigans, our former President Trump. And yeah, he opened some eyes to certain degrees. So I do thank him for that, like the corruption, the bias in the media, some things like that. He did very well on. Aside from that, he's probably one of the worst presidents we've ever had in my eyes. But yeah, so before we get out of here, you just want to plug anything, kind of your platforms on your social media and where everyone can get to your websites and things like that.
so you can find me at michaelruizforcongress.com. That's my website where I outline all of my policy proposals and I talk about the district. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike for Congress. That's Mike, the number 4, underscore Congress. And I also host my own podcast called Mike for Congress, available anywhere you get your podcasts. And so thank you so much. We're still in the very early days of this campaign. So
Mhm.
listening, going over to the site is really helpful. So
Yeah.
thanks.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Being on the show. Thank you. This is the Uprising.
Yeah.
It's the Uprising.